Mila Araujo is a social business strategist, speaker, and director of personal insurance for Ogilvy and Ogilvy Inc. in Westmount, Quebec. She has a diverse background in management, public relations, nonprofit, and events. Mila is a contributing author for several online sites, including 12 Most, Business to Community, Winning at the Insurance Gamble, Grow, and her own blog, Perspectives. She's an active member of the social media community and is the producer of 140 Conference, Montreal. It's great to have you, Mila.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Mila, I also want you to meet Padra Ramtin, who is the person in the middle, and he is involved with the insurance industry. He's joining us to learn from your wisdom.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so let's get into we have covered the discussion of why the regulated industry should get involved with social media and how they can do it, and we discussed the fact that they shouldn't be scared. It's just having normal conversations. But being that social media is so public, it is inevitable that disasters could happen. Someone may say something wrong. So as I was telling to Padra, the more and more I teach social media and the more and more I work with it, it becomes more and more clear to me that there is absolutely a need for a social media policy for any business, and especially for the regulated industry. So that's what we're talking about today. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think it's something that is definitely critical because of the fact that it is a regulated industry. So I think that as more and more governing bodies become involved or put social media on a priority list, I think that that'll actually become something that they're going to be putting into part of the guidelines of how different businesses have to operate. So for example, currently there are certain criteria in any regulated industry of how you operate. I think that what we're going to be seeing within the next year or two, probably within that time because of need, is that there's going to be an obligation for organizations who have any social media activity to create such a policy.
Okay, so obligation, sorry?
Well, as I was saying that I think that what will happen is that there will be an obligation for anyone operating in a regulated industry probably to come up with such a policy so that it becomes a matter of record as part of the operations of the business. Because right now I think it's just a matter that it's such a new technology, people don't know how it's being used, but eventually the governing bodies will probably come in and say, well, where is your social media policy and how are you respecting your guidelines as a professional in social media? There has to be a document to show exactly how you are operating.
I see. So the governing bodies haven't really caught up on that yet. Are you saying that? Is that what you're saying?
I can't speak for all governing bodies in all areas because there are state laws, there are provincial laws, there's depending on your country, there are all kinds of regulations. But I can say that as of now, at least where I'm operating, we haven't received a demand stating you absolutely must create a social media policy. I think moving forward, these governing bodies would be wise to do so, and I think that they eventually will. Right now, what I am seeing a lot of is training. There are conversations like the one we're having right now. Different people are testing different grounds, but at some point, I think it's going to become a matter of necessity to provide some sort of social media policy. Right now it's a recommendation and it's a wise precaution to take. But essentially when we're dealing in these industries, we have to realize at some point we're going to have to put very clear directives on how we can operate.
I see. Okay. So there are different kinds of, because you're in the insurance industry, right? Personal insurance.
Right.
Okay, so there are different ways that people buy personal insurance. It's either they go to a huge provider or they can get it from broker that buys insurance from various different providers. And so there's two different ways that we buy insurance. And for brokers that are dealing with major companies, I guess it's easy to provide one policy for their brokers and say, this is our policy and that's what you follow. But the ones that are dealing with many different insurance policies, insurance providers, how do you envision those individual brokers to create a policy that fits every one of those companies?
I think each brokerage or each firm, any financial services firm, is an operating body of their own. And so I think they absolutely have to create their own. I'm sure that there will be organizations, especially governing bodies, who will provide examples of what could be included within. But each firm has to create their own policy, because the policy is not necessarily about regulation. It's about company values. It's about what the intent is of the social media activity. So social media is such a huge term, I almost don't like using it, because you've got YouTube, you've got all of the different networks, you've got external networks, and you've got internal networks. And so you have to almost make a decision as a company as to which of these networks and which of these platforms you're going to be using would provide your company value. And once you do that, I think that the policy comes from there. For example, I could say, well, the policy must include something about video. But as a firm, there may be a firm that says, look, we just are not going to get into video. We're not equipped yet. We're only going to be on our Facebook page. So different people will take a different strategy on how they want to approach their online presence. And you need to take that into consideration when you're creating your policy. And then as you add, it has to be something that's adaptable as well, because as you add different platforms, you're going to have to adapt that a little bit as well. There's, if for example, at one point the company decides they're going to be using Pinterest, let's say, well, that's about pinning different things. So is it acceptable to pin from other people? Is there going to be a criteria about that? Are all employees going to be invited to pin on boards, and will they be restricted in the types of things that they're going to pin? I mean, I'm choosing something with photography only because photography is something anyone can do. So I see that as an area where within my office people could be taking pictures, and if I open it up and say, okay, well, everyone can share everything on on Pinterest because we want to share our environment, then the more people that are able to participate easily, the more opportunity you have for potential error or something to happen that would go against the company values. So I think the first thing that has to happen is that you, as a company, you have to know what your intent is on being online. What is your strategy behind it? What are you trying to accomplish? And how does that fit in with the mission of your company and your company values? And so once you come up with your values and what you want to support, I think that's when you're going to want to write an individualized social media policy for your firm and how it sees the use. And then, of course, contain within it whatever limitations that you feel necessary. I'm more liberal. I like to allow people the chance to express themselves. In our company right now, we have not invited our employees to post on our social sites. We've just started launching that aspect of it. As far as blogging goes, we have a few people contributing, and there aren't a lot of restrictions around it. But if you open this up, you have to decide who you're going to open this up to. And as you open it up more and more, guidelines and training become very important, because people don't always see the big picture. And so there could be issues that you would never imagine could cause a huge problem if you don't outline these things from the get-go.
Okay, so you that's great advice, and it's interesting that we always get back to values. It seems like people have to actually sit down, individual firms or brokers, they should actually sit down and come up. Maybe some of them haven't even thought about having to have a value. All they think about is, I have to drive sales and put people down the funnel And it's something new, it's something to adjust to, because you always, in order to be successful in social media, your business kind of has to have a personality.
Absolutely.
It's a new way of thinking about doing business, isn't it?
It is 100%, and I think some of the firms that will do really well in social media aren't necessarily the largest ones, but they're the ones who are going to be able to spend the time and think about what it is that they stand for, and and to create that personality. I like the way you've put that, the personality of the company, and figure out what that is. And so there could be various personalities that one company could have, because there could be different divisions, there could be different target markets. But if you don't figure that out from the beginning, then you will be lost in your communications, because you won't know exactly what you're trying to achieve. You won't understand who's the person behind this, who's the company. So the company does really become humanized at that level. And I think people misunderstand humanization of a brand into making the brand seem friendly and charming and social. But it's much deeper than that. You have to understand the core values of the company, and it can be very interesting to go through that. I know when I started, probably about 3 years ago, I understood it roughly, but when I really started to dive into it, I started to realize came up and more value points came up. And this is something that is adjusted as we've started to use social and understand it more, and really understand what our culture is. So it comes also to the culture.
Okay, I like that. It's a good thing to humanize things. As I was reading, as you know, I teach at UCSD, and I was trying to prepare my slides we have a discussion coming up about creating social media policy next week, and I was looking at examples of social media policies. One of the important items was truthfulness and being transparent. And I'm just so delighted that that's actually become a virtue and a requirement, because it transforms the businesses of today. It's fantastic. And so these are these are issues that businesses haven't been thinking about, and it takes a lot of training, doesn't it?
Definitely takes a lot of training and a lot of getting used to how to operate on different platforms. I think that's the other part. And so in writing policies, if you look at a traditional HR perspective of writing a policy, if you've been looking at different social media policies, you've probably picked up on this. You can see right away where the policy's been written just by HR, who is just taking some basic rules, and sticking to basic things like, you won't use foul language. Like there are some basic criteria and policies that are very standard. But if you look at something that's been written by someone who understands what the objectives are of operating on social networks, I think you'll find a lot more of that, and a lot more of the references to being truthful, to being transparent. Now, what that means, you actually have to be on site with your people and do a training to explain to them what that means. Being truthful doesn't necessarily mean being abrasive. Some people will translate. So there are aspects of that require training. But I think that if everything is looked at from who's going to be using it to who you're trying to reach, and there's appropriate training given, then the policy that you start off with may adjust a little bit in the way. It can't be rigid, but it will help guide people, and it'll also protect your company, because that's when we're looking at the policy itself, it's to protect the company. And so you have to observe the wonderful qualities of social media, which I would say the biggest one is being open, while still protecting the company and protecting your clients as well. So it's a multi-leveled issue. It's not as simple. Someone once asked me, "Can I see a copy of your policy?" We have one internally as well for our internal social network use, and really I explained this is very individualized. It's very much to what we've been doing. I'd be happy to discuss with you what's in our policy, but it's not necessarily something that I'm gonna broadcast, because there's some very specific things in there that touch on, you know, the branding and the marketing strategy. Those things are all integrated. It's not a black and white document that simply, it's not like a dress code where you have like, this is what you'll wear, this is what you won't wear. These are our office hours. It's a little bit more weaved into the culture of the company.
Amazing. Yeah, that's fun. There is a really good example of what it means to be transparent in social media. And apparently it was in Johns Hopkins. I don't know if you saw it or not. Was it Johns Hopkins or some other hospital where one of the doctors broke some rules or something and he was fired, or maybe he talked about some data about patients. I can't remember what, but what they did, instead of sort of sweeping it on the carpet, they went out and openly blogged about it. And they said that this happened in our establishment and this is how we dealt with it. So that's an example of being transparent in a regulated industry, which is healthcare. So that something of that effect, that sort of, I guess that's a good example of being transparent in your social media activities.
It's very important, and we actually had a case where someone had put something on one of our sites, and they were very upset because mold damage was not covered. And anyone in insurance knows that mold is simply not covered, and it's not something that we can do anything about. And unfortunately, it's just a matter of explaining the wording and reinforcing with the client that unfortunately this is just a terrible situation that wouldn't be covered. And in that particular case, you know, the client was very upset and obviously posted on a site. And so what we did was the president of our company actually answered himself, and he gave his complete answer with the full explanation, protecting the specific details, but keeping it very much to answer the points that the client had brought up publicly themselves. And I think that was the best way we could have handled it. It was horrific. And I mean, we were horrified because you don't want to see anything like that, and especially when you realize it's coming across as if we've done something awful, but really it's, you know, that's standard. But I think that was the best approach. And sometimes it's hard to do that. The first instinct might be to delete the comment or do something else. You can run into some very strange situations when you're dealing with conflict online. Mm-hmm. And if you just remember the values of the company and just respond as if you were responding to the person on the telephone, mm-hmm. keeping in mind that this is a public response, so you don't want to give them their personal details as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's the challenge, and that's what the policy should address. How are you going to handle, you know, a conflict? What will the approach be? What's okay to delete? What isn't? And you can put those sections of your policy on your sites. So you'll see more and more, if you look at people's Facebook pages or companies' Facebook pages, you'll see that they do very often put down comment policies as to what's acceptable and what's not. And within there, they'll often include, you know, any derogatory comments, any racist remarks, anything that's particularly aggressive. And so there's a certain level of respect that you want to have for your environment. You're running a community. And so within those guidelines, I think it's okay to, you know, if you're a certain type of company, maybe foul language is not appropriate. Another type of company, maybe it is. You know, so you want to protect your environment as well. You don't want to create a place where people are feeling uncomfortable or attacked. So those are some of the things that you can share publicly so that people know where you stand. And that comes from having the discussion behind the scenes before you get involved at that stage.
Yeah, that's great advice. So I guess going back to the discussion of being a broker and dealing with a company, there could be, I can see it there would be two different levels of policies. One that would be the providers would offer, which would be, you know, that dress code that you talked about, what you can say, what you cannot say. and then the individual insurance broker themselves, then they have to sit down and think about what is their policy, what is their sort of personality and things like that. So you almost have to have two levels, and even you can tell me if I'm going in the right direction or not. And then within the same insurance company, you would have, again, different levels for different part of your company, right?
I would agree completely. I think that's exactly where it has to go. Once you determine what your firm's policy is, you then have to look at who are the people who this policy may apply to, and see if there are certain areas that you want to tailor to certain people. So, for example, you may have a policy for your directors that's going to be different than your regular employees. You may want to, there are going to be different authority levels that you're going to want to assign for working in the social space. And you also have to remember that a lot of companies will have a marketing team, or they may have a social media team. And so you're looking at different mini groups within the company who are going to be observing it differently. So there have to be very specific guidelines for them as well. I mean, it's incredibly complex, but I think that any company, whether it's in a regulated industry or not, should consider this and should take this into account, because right now we're not seeing a lot of cases. I mean, we see a few things. I was researching a few different sites a few weeks ago, and there was one site where the responses from the person managing the page were a little bit abrasive and, in some cases, seemingly inappropriate to me. I would not want the person running my page interacting with people in that way. It just wasn't comfortable to me. Mm-hmm. But I was trying to figure out, is this the intent? Because of the type of business it was a bit of a sportier business. It was an outdoorsy type of business. The response may be the personality of the brand, but it was unclear to me. I wasn't really sure. So somewhere like that, you want to make sure that it's clear what's the brand voice going to be, and that comes in the policy as well, the manner that you're going to interact with others. And that's why it's so specific, because it's possible that that's exactly what they want to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And then that's fine. But if it isn't, if they don't have a policy in place, how are they going to explain to the person running it what their criteria are? You'll only find out after the fact, and then you'll be backtracking. So it does really help to individualize, look at who the different players are, what communications they may be in charge of, and also include within the policy, how do these different players work together in a crisis? Mm-hmm. So you need to know, well, this is your role. You may be in customer service, and we may give you access to the Twitter channel, but the moment that there's a conflict on the Twitter channel and you've directed it elsewhere and it starts to escalate, maybe what you need to do is pull back, and then this, per the policy, this is the person who's going to come in and help you. And by doing things like that, it avoids a lot of the little mix-ups that I think I've seen happen online, where at first you think, how could that be happening? What's wrong with this, Mm-hmm. And then when you find out more about the story after the fact, you realize, okay, there were too many players involved, and they were all trying to help, but not all of them are equipped or hired to do the same thing. It's just like business in the real world. Everybody knows exactly what their rules are, what their expectations are. And so it's essential to have a social media policy that just lets people know exactly where they're standing and how far they can go and who their resources are as well. So it's not just about saying, well, this is what we're going to do online, or these are the black and white rules of how we'll operate. But it also has to address these are the people, or these are the departments, or this is the procedure when something goes wrong, of how we're going to manage that. Mm-hmm. And that's critical.
Okay. So then the policy now is divided into two sections. One is for day-to-day and who can do what, and then you need probably it's a good idea to have another one as crisis management strategy, such that you don't have to put out fires, or when something happens, you know what to do. Just like you said, who you talk to, and in your case, it's obvious that when something like that happened, your president of the company would be the person to answer the question, which is a fantastic idea, because when something like that happened, you want, you know how people go somewhere and say, I want to see your manager. So, so it's always a good idea to someone at higher level to come and talk to people. Not only they bring themselves down to their customers' level, and it also makes that sort of connection with your customers. It's really good. I think that was a great way you handled it. That's fantastic. So I want to, again, go back to the discussion that no matter if you're regulated or not, businesses have to go back and think about the personality of the brand. And this is something that sometimes is maybe mocked, but by some people that are always purely thinking about click-throughs and ROIs and things like that. And some people have called it as rainbows, what do they call it? Unicorns and rainbows, that social media has no, you don't stop talking about unicorns and rainbows. But the thing is, reality is that you have to have, that unicorns and rainbows is part of the discussion, because you have to know who you are as a personality. So I don't think we can just discard that, because social media is not only a marketing channel, it's just a whole new way of doing business.
Definitely, and I think it speaks to the culture of the company. If the culture, if the employees in the company don't understand the culture, or if you're listening to this and you say, well, we don't have a culture, like what is this culture? Then you're probably not at a point where you're ready to be trying to portray the culture of your company as a personality in the social space online. Mm-hmm. Because once you understand the culture of the company, it becomes easy to respond to things and make decisions and share things. If you're a fun group of people and you like to do certain things, then it becomes easy to know, okay, one of the things we're going to share is how much fun we're having together. We're going to keep that light aspect. In the insurance industry, you could certainly be very rigid as well. You could decide to go with a very, crisp image and just operate in that way as well. It really depends who your target market is, how you want to communicate with them, and that has to be reflected in your culture. If you're posting all kinds of super fun pictures of people who are great to talk to and easy to get along with as let's say the staff, or if that's the image of the company online, and then somebody calls and they hit a harsh and abrasive person who's just very, very business, there's no connection. Yeah. There's going to be a disconnect there. Because the company is doing great online and they look happy and great, and then when they call through, the culture doesn't match. So that's why I think the brand personality comes from a strong culture where everybody is fitting in, understanding what they're there to do. It's mm-hmm. not just about the the various job tasks. It's about the attitude in general that is going to carry through in the way that people communicate. And what's interesting too is that if the social media policy is not written with the target client or with the culture of the company in mind, mm-hmm. that disconnect will be forced by the social media strategy. So for example, if it's too rigid and if it's giving too many guidelines and you're trying to be more open and more transparent, a poorly written policy or a policy that's too firm is not going to allow a personality to come through. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of an art to writing that policy to respect that, because the policy itself can hurt social media. And we hear that problem quite often when people say, well, we have to go to legal first, and then we have to go here, and then we have to go there, and by the time we're ready to post, we can't the moment is lost, and a lot of people stay out of social media because of that.
Yeah.
When the policy is too rigid. So I mean, those types of policies are not really social media policies. Those are just policies that have been written to control social media, which is very different than writing something to work with the vision of that kind of communication in the community.
Yeah, so that attitude of top-down command and control, this is something Rick Dragon talks about in his book, that you want to change from that attitude of command and control to inspire, to give guidelines that inspire and let people do whatever they do. So those social media policies shouldn't be so rigid. Otherwise, because a lot of social media has to do with creativity, and people have to have the freedom to come up with innovative posts. So if you're too restrictive, then that sort of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we're also forgetting that in regulated industries, people who are licensed to operate in these industries know their code of ethics. They know what their guidelines are for operations. So I think it's a matter of coaching and helping them to understand how does that translate to online activity. So, you know, you should be able to give professionals who are, you know, in a regulated industry the ability to communicate online simply because they're still under those obligations. Mm-hmm. They can't just forget that because they're on Twitter. Mm-hmm. That's another point that I think companies fear. They don't realize that, you know, these people are still under a professional obligation, and they need to carry that through, whether it's, you know, even on the weekend, if I go home and someone asks me something about insurance, I operate in the same way because it's a profession and I respect it. So I think that you can give a little bit of leeway if you know that your employees are licensed and they respect their obligations, mm-hmm. And just create a policy around it to just help them rather than restrict them, because the industry already has restricted what we can and can't do. We just need to understand how to translate it and have some boundaries around, you know, what benefits the company, what moves in the same direction as what the company wants to accomplish. How can we work together using social activity to, you know, meet our goals, increase our sales, reach out into the community. It can be very, very interesting, but we have to remember what are we really talking about here? We're not talking about opening the door and, you know, giving drinks to all our employees and asking them to, you know, to start posting like that. There's still professionalism involved. It's a professional approach as opposed to an unmonitored one which can have greater consequences.
Yeah. Our mutual friend Ray Hill says, if you are speaking without a culture, you are talking without a brain.
Very well said.
Very well said, Ray.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, he's watching us. He's watching us. So.
Hi, Ray.
Okay, let's see what Ramtin is asking. His Padra is asking, where can we find the sample social media policy document? Would you like to answer that?
I don't have my social media documents online, just because they're
specific for you.
They're rather specific, but I can certainly write up some criteria that could be generalized, that I found really helpful. We've created ours as we've gone along. So I mean, we've been using social media for I think 4 years now. Now we're in 2013, so 4 years. And along the way, we've hit some bumps with our employees. We've seen different things happen, and it's helped us understand a bit more what we need to have in there. So there's certain guidelines that I could blog about, definitely. And Sherry, I'm sure you have several examples. There are definitely examples online, but I can't think of any particular spot to refer myself at the moment.
Actually, there is. As I prepared for my lecture, I found a website where it actually is a resource for social media policies for a number of industries, and I posted it. Padra, if you go to our open social media community, I posted it there, I think a couple of days ago. I posted a link there. So you can find it there. That's why I've created this open social media community. So whenever I find something really, a resource that is really useful, I share it there. So go there and find it. Now I have a sort of want to know your opinion about something. So here we are individual brokers, and day-to-day business activities is really busy, and they gotta make the money, feed their families. So it is hard to scale back and sit down and start thinking about creating a policy that's based on a culture. What do you think? Do you think is it a good idea to outsource, at least not developing the culture, but somebody coming in and helping you if you don't have the time to create the policy for you? What is the best way to go?
I firmly believe that the best way is to outsource or hire people specifically to work in that area. Mm-hmm. The reason that I would say outsource is because managing a Twitter stream, a Facebook page, it depends what platform you want to go with, and depends on how large your office is. So if you have thousands and thousands of clients, you might want to outsource. If you are a small office with just a couple of thousand clients and a fairly small volume, let's say if you're an office with 2 or 3 employees and you're well staffed for the number of clients you have, then you might want to see if there's someone in there that has those capabilities. But something very important to remember is that an insurance broker is performing a certain task. It's customer service related. They're professionals, but it's also very specific. And the skill set that someone has as a broker is not necessarily the skill set to be a communications person. It's very different. And so, when someone is answering questions, or even in a call center, there's a certain way that you answer. There's a certain training you've already had. And the thing is, you're dealing one-on-one with people, and so you don't have these concerns of disclosing too much information. So there may be people who are well suited to communicate openly and publicly and represent your team. I would be very surprised if everybody was equipped to do well online and to represent your firm.
I think as individuals. Your business.
Sorry?
And everybody in the firm, you mean?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't recommend, I think you have to be strategic there too. You have to take a look and see who is able to communicate in this new area. And, right now I'm speaking about Twitter because it's it's very quick, and you have to be able to portray your message fairly quickly. But, even blogging, are all of these people strong writers? Just because social media is available and just because it's supposed to be something that's transparent and everyone's supposed to get involved, it's a very community-based, the feel of social media just feels like everyone should be doing it. Mm-hmm. But as a company, you have to strategically look at it, and it's why I like your question. Are you equipped to handle the blogging, the Twitter, the Facebook, or video production, all of these things? Or would it make more sense to have a company support you and come in and manage that and work with your people so that your people, they have access to them, they can speak with them? And that's also in the guidelines. You can decide that you will go a bit further with your information, and in that case you do want to have your licensed people going, or you can do what I see TD Bank doing, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. The way they handle it is they just kind of say, they have a conversation without talking about anything, and they just make the person feel better, and and they'll say things like, "Oh, that's really terrible. I'm really sorry to hear that. I think I know someone who can help you. Can we go to direct messaging?" So if you're going to take that approach, which I think is quite good, and some people might say, well, you have to be hands-on, you have to be involved, but it depends what your capabilities are. Mm-hmm. That approach is just fine to give an online presence, have a touch point on Twitter, let's say, for your clients to reach you, and then they can go behind the scenes and have a direct access to someone who can take it to the next level and really solve the problem offline. So I think it depends on the firm, on the people in the firm, how much time they have, if they are effective communicators for public communications. And, that's a whole field.
Yes.
So this, social social has really emerged between PR, marketing, customer service. There are qualities there that have to be quite special in order to be able to operate and do well. So I don't know that the answer is just let's just find a bunch of people here and throw them online.
No.
I don't know that that's the best call. And by outsourcing, very often what you can do, which I really like, is you can actually get specialists who are going to come and they're going to interview your strongest thinkers and they're going to write up a really nice piece. And meanwhile, they're going to have one specialist for the writing. They're going to have a specialist for the Facebook. They're going to have a specialist for the Pinterest strategy. And those are things that are very difficult to have within your company. So when you outsource, and I'm just throwing a number out, maybe it's going to be $2,000 a month to have certain tasks taken care of. That's very individualized, so I worry about throwing that number. But let's just say $2,000 a month. Some companies might say, that's crazy. How could we pay something like that? But if you think about it, hiring someone to do that is going to cost you way more than $24,000 a year. I mean, you can't even get an intern for that. So you have to start thinking about what's the best strategy for us? How are we going to proceed? And if you do want to hire someone, then there are advantages there too, because they can work on your branding with you. They can use, your different staff members as resources. They can maybe coach, so there are advantages in both areas. But to get involved just to, let's say, save money and put people who are not equipped or not comfortable in that role and were never previously trained for that role could be very difficult, because then you may have customer service issues.
Yeah, you're right. That's great advice. I guess one thing also that they can do is that if they have people that really are trainable, what they can do, they can hire an agency to create that social media strategy for them. That could be a couple of $1,000s too, but at least it's a one-time payment. And then another option is to have that help them create their strategies and policies, and then having the agency to come and train maybe once a month or something like that, to make it a little bit more affordable.
That's the ideal approach, because then what you have is you have the understanding of the platforms. You have access to someone to kind of help you along when you run into problems. Mm-hmm. And you can give opportunities to those in the company who enjoy, being social. Like, for example, in my team, I've got probably, out of 15, probably 5 that I would say, okay, I think that you understand enough the workings of this quick online activity, and I think that they have strengths that they could do that. The rest probably wouldn't even want to know anything about it. So it's not even about, what I think the qualities are. A lot of people want nothing to do with this. They're not comfortable. But you can identify people in your team who have these qualities and who you think are going to enjoy it, and it can be a value add for them instead of a burden, mm-hmm. and they'll take off with it. I mean, we have, when email was introduced, people didn't want to do business on it. I mean, they were so afraid of getting involved in email, and they felt so overwhelmed by it. And now it's something that's being used all the time. But we even see with email, there's some people that do all of their business by email with their clients because their clients love it. And then we have other, populations of our target base who don't really like email at all. And so we try and match those service people with those clients. And so I think that if you do allow your people, the ones who are comfortable with it, with a proper guideline and some training, then you can also take a look at the option of maybe having like a select few people who are going to be involved. And I'm focusing on Twitter right now and Facebook, because those are kind of the quickest touch point and more difficult things to be interrupting people's days. Blogging is a whole different thing. Mm-hmm. But there are people who will see value in it, and there might be clients who might enjoy it, but it's a matter of identifying the strengths in those people and saying, you know what, let's bring you on board, and they have to want to do it too. And then that can be a really good feeling for the company too, because then you've got the real people, who are going to be talking to the clients behind the scenes. You see them online sometimes, and I think that clients enjoy that. I think they really enjoy learning more about the people they're doing business with. At least in our environment, we are very relationship based. Our clients tend to like when they have touch points besides just the phone. So that's also very nice.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So a question for you. Do you offer that kind of services in terms of, well, I know you have a full-time job, but in terms of helping companies come up with a strategy?
I definitely, I can't do it full-time because I have a full-time job, but I definitely have helped with different companies that are interested in going into a certain direction and do consulting for that.
Okay, to help them with their strategy and policy, because I can't see you doing day to day because you have a full-time job.
Exactly. It's that would be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, yeah. So
But
if
it's definitely something I do, and I do it a lot with public speaking as well. So what
oh,
I'll do is I'll go and I'll speak at a conference, or I'll do, for example, in September with the Viva Community Fund, what I did was I did sessions with different brokers,
uh-huh.
showing them how giving them some ideas. So there's a certain capacity that I can do that in, but it's usually very, very structured and by appointment and
Okay.
by various conversations that develop.
Okay, so how can people find you?
Oh, it's Mila's Page on Twitter at MILASPAGE,
Mhm.
and my website is milaspage.com.
Fantastic. Very nice. So if people were looking for a more comprehensive day-to-day things, where do you suggest they look for? Would the LinkedIn be a good place
To look for me?
for you and the part of the services that you don't provide?
That's a difficult question. I think in order to look for services, you have to understand what you're looking for.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I think, having a conversation with someone who is a strategist, like yourself, Sherry, or myself, and just bouncing the idea around first might help give the right direction, because I think the most complicated thing here is that people think that social media is just social media, and it's simply not. There are different platforms. There are different objectives. You have different target clients. So you may want to get involved. Maybe your business only wants to get involved on LinkedIn to start off with. Maybe that's the right profile for what you can accomplish at the moment. Maybe they just want to get involved on Instagram. Believe it or not, a lot of people are using Instagram for business. It's really very specific. And you could look on LinkedIn, but you're going to find so many people. I think you really need to be able to have read a little bit about the person, gotten to know them a little bit, watch shows like this one, to get to know you, Sherry. Like, I have a sense of what your values are.
Mhm.
These
I
things
don't
are
want
very,
to be self-promotional here. This is for for people, but Captive Touch does offer those services, but that's not
it's
the. But thank you for mentioning that.
well, I'm mentioning that, and I mean also, for anyone who's doing any kind of strategic consulting or offering their services, really try and find out about them, either by asking other
Exactly.
people who you see them talking to, or talking to them yourself and following what they're doing. Because if you go on LinkedIn and you do a search for social media consulting,
You're gonna
I
get a billion.
search, I would be afraid of what I would find. And
Yeah.
frankly, I would never look for other social media people by doing a search on LinkedIn myself, because I know I'm going to find some people who can appear very strong, and they might not be in line with my values for my company. So it's almost like an interview process, because you're inviting someone to work with you. And I guess the biggest advice I would give on that one is just to ask them very straight out. So, what would your strategy be? What platform should we use? Don't use the regular buzzwords. Try and get them to say something that comes out of them. One question I asked recently that I was speaking to someone, I said, well, how would you measure that? I know that sounds like a very basic question to you and I, Sherry, but this person was in marketing, and
They didn't know.
they didn't answer. The way they answered was very interesting, but it was clearly they had no idea of the deeper level that you could measure something with.
Mm.
And so, you know, it's very easy to throw the buzzwords around. People, anyone I meet, I just have to tell them 2 or 3 things I'm doing, and all of a sudden they believe I'm an expert. And I do take a lot of pride in this field, so I will say I do know quite a bit. But I always tell them, but just because I know how to use Twitter doesn't make me an expert. I appreciate that, you know, the confidence, but really that's not what makes you someone in a position to advise a business.
Mm-hmm.
The person has to have some insight into the strategy.
Yeah, I think the best way to judge, I actually have a video recording on my YouTube channel about that very topic, how to find somebody. And I think in addition to looking for their online behavior, their profile and whatever, the most thing that is really telling for me, or that should be for people that are looking for somebody to work with, is that the person who you're trying to hire should ask you for a initial powwow, initial getting together, either online via the Skype or Google Plus or in person. And if the person you're trying to hire, they're not asking you questions about your company values, about your business goals, about what it is you're trying to accomplish, if they don't ask you those questions and say, oh yeah, well, you know, we can do this and this and this and this, without asking you questions, that's a big sort of cause for concern. And unfortunately, this kind of, which is my approach, I always require that I ask 100 questions, and sometimes it sort of doesn't sit well with some business owners because they just want something fast.
Yeah.
But personally, I'm not going to suggest anything to anybody unless I can understand what it is, what kind of resources they have, what is their, I mean, in terms of how much of the work they can handle themselves, what is their goal, what is their philosophy. If I can't understand what it is they're doing, it's hard for me to make any suggestions. I've even gone so far to criticize people's websites, and they didn't like it. But a good, when you look for, just from me, if you're looking for somebody to work with, you want to make sure that they are being transparent, asking you lots of questions, somebody who's interested in you, your business, who you are, and in your success, rather than interested in telling you what they can do for you.
I agree completely. And I think that's the key. Like you said, if they can't answer, if they can't share with you what it is they're looking to accomplish or their philosophy, how can they expect someone to work with them? They should be afraid, because essentially if you don't give the directive, or if you don't have in you to explain what your company values are, all of this, what exactly do you really think the person's going to do? Applying a cookie cutter solution to what it does, that goes completely against the humanization of your brand. Exactly. It goes completely against any culture, because you've given nothing. So that's very true. If the questions are not asked, there is definitely cause for concern.
Yes, it is. And I meet people. I just met with somebody a couple of weeks ago. They said, I want to be in social media and I want to be in all of them. But, you know, you slow down what it is we're trying to do. So I think it's going to take, and this is exactly one of the reasons I started these videos, because we still have so much to go in order to educate business owners about what it means to use social media. And I'm just hoping that the messages that we're sharing here through this channel reaches them. It just makes life a lot easier for everybody if we all understand what it is we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. Well, I thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoy your video series. It's an amazing service to everybody, because you keep it open, and that's so important. A lot of people will keep things, you know, very closed and tight, and that's a value that I think is very important, the sharing of knowledge, because that allows people to really understand what they need to know. So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. You're welcome. If you keep it open, it benefits everybody. There's no need to keep it closed, and I enjoyed and I love talking to you. You're just such wealth of knowledge. So I'm just so glad that you've come here for a second time, and I hope you come again.
Oh, I would love to. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll have to do another one with we still have to talk to people in the health industry and the biotech industry. We need to have a panel.
I know that is so that area is so interesting, and there's so many fascinating things that have been done, because I mean, really, insurance is boring to most people, but the health, health can be very exciting. People want to know about it, and there's a lot more demand on someone in that industry to give information. I think it's a lot more challenging than the insurance industry. People
Well,
might push,
if you
but
know anybody has expertise in social media in those kind of industries, let me know. I would love to talk to them.
absolutely, I will send you a message
Okay.
with some connection information.
Yeah.
Abe Casbo is very good. I don't know. He's at Verisoni. I'll send you the information, but
Great.
there are a few different people. In fact, I won't list them all now, but I'll send you a message and I'll connect you with them, and then we'll see if
Fantastic.
because I think that would be a very interesting panel.
Yes, yes, it would. Yes, it would. So, would you like to give some final words, maybe wrap up and as a closing?
Sure. I think the most important thing when we're talking about social media policy is to explore your company culture first, understand who your target clients are or who your target audience is. It may not only be clients, it may be other employees, it may be outreach into the community for example, we like to do an outreach into community groups, and so that's a different target group, and the way we're going to operate with them may be different. So you want to identify who are your target clients, who are the communities that you want to build, how does that fit in line with your values, and what is the feel that you want to give for each of these communities. And once you do that, that's when you could put together a social media policy that's going to respond to respecting the ability to portray those different personalities or feelings or the culture that you want to put through, and then also respect your industry standards. So I think the easiest part is the industry standards part, believe it or not. I think the hardest part is how do you define in your policy how to portray that culture, and writing a policy for different situations like crisis. In a crisis situation, who responds? Figure out all the backroom stuff that's going to happen in any situation, and then you'll understand what your policy needs to explain, because the policy needs to be the go-to place when someone isn't sure what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It should not be the document that's going to keep everyone in a box. It's not the idea. It's the go-to place to answer the questions that your employees are going to have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. I just have learned so much. And
Thank you.
again, thank you for coming. And this wraps up our show for this week. And until next week, please remember, if you enjoyed what Mila had to share, which I'm sure you will, please like the video or +1 and share it on Google+. And until next week,